I want to welcome you this afternoon to a discussion on exam handling techniques in agriculture paper 2, 443/2. Now, my name is Nolin Onyango. I teach at Buvuti Boys High School. Now, we shall look at the topics that are tested in paper 2. We'll also look at the topics that may be tested in both paper 2 and paper 1. We'll also take you through what examiners look for during marking. Again, we shall look at the paper format. We look at types of questions that you expect in your K.C.S.E. And then we shall also go through some do's and don'ts. Time allowing, we will look at some revision strategies that may be helpful to you at this time. So feel welcome, dear candidates. So straight away, the following are the topics that are tested in paper 2. Number 1 is livestock production. And as you're aware, livestock production is spread in Form 1, Form 2, a part of it in Form 3, and a part of it in Form 4. So livestock production 1 up to 7. Livestock production 1 deals with the common breeds. Livestock production 2 deals with livestock health. That is followed by nutrition in Form 2, selection and breeding, livestock rearing practices in Form 3, and then finally poultry and cattle. Now, the other topic that is tested in paper 2 is farm tools and equipment. Also, farm structures, and lastly, farm power and machinery. There are some topics that are tested in paper 1, but they also are tested in paper 2 in a hidden way. I'll explain to you briefly. One such topic is farm records. Farm records is basically a paper 1 topic. However, when you are handling an essay question, for example, describe the management of layers from 1 day old up to 8 weeks old. One of the management practices is keeping of records. You need to cite the appropriate record to be kept when managing this poultry. For example, feeding records, also health records. So in a hidden way, farm records is tested in paper 2. Therefore, when preparing for paper 2, also please visit farm records, especially those that have got to do with livestock production. Forage crops is also partially tested in paper 2. How the forage crops are used to feed livestock is tested in paper 2. We know that forage can be transformed into silage. The amount of silage required by a given animal may be worked out. The dry matter requirements may be used to work out how much silage a dairy animal should be given. So a question around the dry matter may be tested in paper 2. Of course, farm structures is in paper 2, farm power and machinery is in paper 2, farm tools and equipment also is tested in paper 2. Now, briefly, let's look at the paper format. This paper is divided into 3 sections. There is section A, having 30 marks. This section is composed of structured short answer type questions or simple recall. The questions in this section do not demand a lot of writing. If you look at these questions, they are characterized with stimulus words such as state, list, give, outline, which do not require a lot of detail. Therefore, it is advisable not to waste a lot of time on them. They are drawn from all over the syllabus, and for every correct response that a candidate gives, a half a mark is awarded. So you need 60 correct responses to pocket the 30 marks in this section. An example of a question in this section A is name the hormone that is concerned with milk synthesis. Name the hormone that is concerned with milk synthesis. Of course, as you can possibly see, it is oxytocin. The second question, state 3 factors that make a lactating cow to withhold milk during milking. So you can see that these questions, their answers do not demand a lot of detail because of the stimulus words that are used. The 3 factors that might make a lactating animal to withhold milk include poor milking technique, where one uses the fingers to pull the teats, presence of strangers within the zero grazing unit, inflicting pain to the animal, absence of the calf, and change of routine or change of the milkman. Now, section B has 20 marks allocated to it. For every correct response that a candidate writes, you'll earn 1 full mark. The questions here are practical oriented, meaning they are often preceded by either a photograph or a diagram for you to look at and interpret before you begin writing your answers. Now, the questions are often broken into parts. We refer to such questions as structured questions. And one characteristic of a structured question is that the parts are often tied, such that if you miss the right answer in the first part, then the second part automatically becomes wrong, even if you had put the correct answer. In this, okay, that's an example of a question that may appear in section B. As you can see, there is a diagram showing a structure there for keeping fish. And the first question is identify the parts labeled A, B, C, and D. A, B, C, and D. Now, before I forget, during your revision, it is important to focus on the diagrams that are provided in our course books. Now, those diagrams, when you come across one, the problem is being addressed. I have learned that some of the audience are not getting me. So just hold your patience a little. Okay, thank you very much. So I was saying that during your revision, you can focus on diagrams and photographs in our course books and familiarize yourself with the parts of a structure like the one on the screen, because you can easily be asked to identify the parts, as you can see. It's not scrolling. Right. The parts are inlet pipe, and when identifying the part A, don't just say inlet. That would be treated as an incomplete answer that will attract a penalty. So you must say inlet pipe. Part B is dam crest, which is also known as the dike. Part C is spillway, and part D is outlet pipe. Outlet pipe. Now, another example of a question that may be tied to that part A is state-free maintenance practices carried out on the structure after draining. And of course, the responses are on the screen. Repair the dike, clean pond and remove foreign materials, plant grass where necessary, remove undesirable vegetation, and remove silt. Now take note that repair So take note that as a maintenance measure, repair is mentioned only once. The other maintenance practices do not talk about repair. I'm pointing out that because candidates have a tendency to mention one point repeatedly, and in most cases using different phrases or sentences. Thank you. So that is about section B, but take note that section B, you may also be given a data-based question or calculation, a question where you have to use figures provided Thank you very much, technical team. I was in the process of explaining. Yes. Thank you. I was in the process of explaining that in section B, we may also get questions on calculation, where you might be required, for instance, to work out the dry matter requirements or to compute a ration using Pearson's square. We shall get back to these details later on. Procedure-based questions may also appear in this section. And for each question, there is a total of 5 marks and may also be 4. Thank you. Now, section C has 3 questions. The candidates are required to choose only 2. They are essay type questions, which are often split into parts. Sorry, I hope you can now hear me, dear candidates and the teachers. So I'm saying that the section C has 3 questions. Candidates are supposed to answer only 2. And it's advisable to only stick to the instructions on the number of questions to be answered in this section. If you answer a 3rd question, it will not be marked. That is the guideline. Okay. All right. Thank you for that communication, dear participants. We are back to the fish pond. We are saying that in section B, the questions here are practical oriented. That means that they are often preceded with diagrams, as you can see on the screen, that question. The diagrams serve to stimulate you as a candidate to remember the concept around that diagram. Now, it is important during your revision to focus on diagrams and familiarize yourself with the diagrams, knowing the names of parts and the uses of the various parts, and of course, the maintenance measures if the diagram is for a structure. That will prepare you for structured questions on farm structures. Now, identify the parts labeled A, B, C, and D. Now, those parts are an inlet pipe, and it is important to say inlet pipe. Don't say inlet alone. That would be incomplete and will not be marked right. Part B is dam crest or dike. Dam crest or dike. Part C is spillway. Spillway. And of course, part D is outlet pipe. Again, we must say pipe. Now, state 3 maintenance practices carried out on the structure after draining. So the maintenance measures include repair the dike. And I want you to note that repair is mentioned only once, though there are other aspects of the structure that can be repaired. But repair is one maintenance measure, should not be repeated where you are required to give more than one maintenance practice. So repair the dike, clean the pond and remove foreign materials, plant grass where necessary, remove undesirable vegetation, and remove silt. In this section B, questions involving calculations may also be tested. Such questions for paper 2 may be drawn from feed computation and dry matter requirements. Procedure-based questions may also be tested in this section. And as I said, we are going to focus on that one at a later stage. Now let's look at section C. Very briefly, only 2 questions should be answered in this section. During marking, a candidate that answers 3 questions is considered not to have followed the instructions at the front of the paper, what is called the paper instructions. Therefore, what the examiners do is that the last question is cancelled. Only the first 2 questions are marked. Therefore, do not waste your time. Instead, use that time to review the answers that you have written in the other sections. Only answer 2 questions. They are essay type questions, which are currently broken into parts. They could be 2 parts or 3. Now, some students like to start answering the exams from section C. No problem. Perhaps you are being drawn by the marks. It is okay. If you can answer 2 questions adequately, you'd have pocketed 40 marks. But remember to also answer questions in the other sections. Now let's look at what examiners look for. During marking, examiners look for accurate, precise, or on-point responses, logical answers, clear and easy to comprehend or understand. So just use simple language that will make the examiner to get what you mean. Try to be orderly and be on point. Now, misinterpretation of questions is a common problem with candidates. This happens due to lack of understanding of the questions, which leads to giving of wrong answers. It is therefore important for you to internalize the question first before you can formulate an answer and write it. Actually, you need to formulate an answer in your mind and interrogate your answer by looking at the question 1 or 2 more times so that you are certain you are putting down the correct answer. As a word of advice, interaction with many examination papers, past K.C.S.E papers and mock papers, will serve to prepare you adequately in terms of giving you appropriate examination language so that your answers will be on point. What is an examination question? Dictionary definition: a question is a sentence that asks for information. Simplified, we can say a question is an instruction or a set of instructions that a candidate responds to in writing. For agriculture, you respond to the question in writing. Now, an exam question consists of a stimulus word: state, explain, describe, just to mention a few. This is a very important aspect of the question because it determines the scope, how much material you will put as you respond to that question. Another component of a question is the concept that is being tested. In a question, some of the questions also indicate the number of responses that are required. And lastly, some questions have got a word or a phrase that defines the area from which you should draw your responses. Perhaps an example would be ideal at this point. State 5 harmful effects of parasites on livestock. Which is the stimulus word there? State. Then 5 describes the number of responses that you are required to give as a candidate. The concept being tested is parasites, and it is focusing on the effects, the harmful effects of parasites. And if you're not careful, if you don't read the question 2 times, you might fail to recognize the word livestock, because the parasites have effects on livestock. They also have effects on human beings. So that word livestock is religiously confining you to harmful effects of parasites on livestock and not on human beings. So it is advisable to read a question more than once. Of course, for this particular question, your responses would include transmission of diseases to livestock. Some parasites transmit diseases to livestock, irritation of the livestock, injuries that lead to secondary infection. The parasites also deprive livestock of their food nutrients, some of them, of course. But take note that increasing cost of production is not a response to this question, because that one is not affecting the livestock, as the question says. So take note of that. So those 4 components of a question need to be in the mind of the candidate as you answer the question. It is therefore advisable to underline those components so that as you begin to answer the question, you will not go outside of the information that is required of you. So read a question more than once, identify keywords, highlight the keywords to capture the mind, and therefore you are able to focus on them as a guide towards writing the correct answer. Let us look at some types of questions. And this is the reason, one major reason, why a student may come out of an agriculture exam paper celebrating that they have passed, only for the results to be released and they find that they have not attained the grade that they were expecting to get. There are 2 major types of questions. There are general questions and there are specific questions. So as you read a question, you must interrogate to find out whether the question is general or it is specific. Now, what do I mean? General questions will only score where the answer is also provided in a general form. Specific questions will also earn you a mark only if your answers are specific. It is important to note that most questions are actually specific and therefore demand specific answers. Majority of candidates miss marks by giving general answers. Now, let's look at some possible areas where questions may be drawn to help us distinguish clearly between general and specific questions. On maintenance of farm tools and equipment, and maintenance practices on a disc plow. Let's formulate a question out of that statement. 2 questions, in fact. Outline the maintenance practices on farm tools and equipment. Outline the maintenance practices on farm tools and equipment. In your view, is that a specific question or a general question? Good, I can hear some answers. That is a general question. Why? Because it does not specify the tool or the equipment where we should carry out maintenance practices. Now listen to the next question. Outline the maintenance practices carried out on a disc plow. Outline the maintenance practices carried out on a disc plow. That's a specific question. Thank you. Specific because the implement is mentioned. So the moment an implement, a tool or an equipment is mentioned, then that question is specific. And the responses must also be given taking a specific form. Now, the first part of our question, or the first question, where we said outline maintenance practices on farm tools and equipment. You can put answers like oil moving parts, so you are not naming a part. Repair broken parts, you are not naming a part. Repair worn out parts. So your answer must also be general. On the other hand, the second question, where we said outline maintenance practices of a disc plow. Because the disc plow is mentioned, we go specific in writing our responses. Lubricate. And now we are not saying the moving parts, we are saying lubricate the disc hubs and the furrow wheel bearings. You are mentioning the name of the part where lubrication is done. That is a specific answer. Sharpen discs by hammering. Sharpen discs by hammering. Now it is not just sharpen the cutting edges. Hammer blunt discs. We are mentioning the part that is sharpened because we must also be specific. The question is specific. Replace broken discs. Replace broken discs. And before I forget, now the furrow wheel has got, the furrow wheel bearings have got some parts that are rubbing on each other. Are those parts described as moving parts or movable parts? The parts of an implement that are rubbing on each other during operation are referred to as moving parts. Now, movable means can be taken from one point to another. For example, movable calf pen. So if you are answering a general question, like we have seen in the previous slide, you can say oil or apply grease on moving parts. Don't say movable, that would be technically wrong. Again, I want to say that the word replace goes with worn out parts. When the disc is broken, it cannot be used anymore. So it has to be replaced. So tie the word replace with a part that is completely damaged, that it cannot be used again. It could simply have become worn out. For example, the share of an ox plow. The share of an ox plow is the part that cuts the furrow slice horizontally. It wears out faster. Once worn out, we say replace. Don't say repair worn out. That would be wrong. A worn out part is not repaired, it is replaced. Other areas where you may encounter general questions or specific questions include general methods of disease control. In livestock, you may be asked to explain 5 general methods of controlling livestock diseases. General methods. But again, you may be asked to explain 5 methods of controlling a named disease, like East Coast fever. The moment a disease is named, then your answers must also take a specific format. And there are some answers that now may not apply because there are some disease control methods that do not apply when it comes to control of the named disease. Signs of ill health in livestock, symptoms of a named disease. importance of farm fences, importance of a named type of fence. So you can take note of this for purposes of your revision, so that one afternoon you can focus on 2 types of questions and have some of you prepare and present, as the rest participate by listening and making additional points. Now, I would like to talk about a tied question. A tied question is one whose first part is linked to the second part. First part is linked to the second part, meaning if you do not get the answer to the first part, then the second part also becomes automatically wrong. For example, you may be provided with a photograph of a tick. Then you are asked to name the parasite. Name the parasite. That's the first part of the question. The second part, state 3 control measures of the parasite. Now, if you committed and said that that is sesefly instead of tick, the first part becomes wrong, and unfortunately, the second part, even if you wrote the correct responses, also become wrong. Now, tied questions are common in structured questions, which, as we had said earlier, are found in section B of paper 2. So again, you might be provided with a tool in a photograph or a diagram, and you are asked to identify it and then state the function of the tool. Those are also tied. Those are also tied. So you need to be very careful. Now, in case you are not able or you are not sure of the identity, it is better to skip the identity bit, go to the next question, answer it adequately, and allow yourself time. Perhaps before you finish your exam and hand in the paper, you could have recalled the correct identity. You can come back and post that answer. If you're not certain, it is safer to leave it blank. My prayer, however, is that you will be having the correct answers. Now, in writing your answers, avoid using same words in the question to describe the use of something like a hammer for hammering nails. There is a substitute. Of course, you would have said something, but for purposes of marking, there is a word that is equivalent to hammering, driving nails into wood. And for that matter, I would like to say you must say into wood. Don't leave it hanging, it would be incomplete. Now, a milking bucket for milking. It's not for milking, but it is used during milking. It is used to hold milk during milking. If you say that a milking bucket is used for milking, then one may not know what the milking bucket is, because during milking, we also use, for example, dairy milk. We also use a strip cup, just to mention some few other requirements for the process of milking to take place. So you must be specific, and you say it is for holding milk during milking. There are these questions that involve differentiating. In marking of questions that require a candidate to differentiate between 2 terms, a rule is employed called the all or nothing rule, meaning you must bring out a difference under each terminology and tie sufficiently. Let me use an illustration. Let's say you have been asked to distinguish between apiculture and aquaculture. A common practice with candidates is to define the 2 terms and link them using a word like whale. Well, that might earn you 1 out of 2 marks. Rather, I propose that you use the definition to identify differences in the two practices. Now, what is apiculture? The practice of rearing bees in beehives. What is aquaculture? The practice of rearing fish in fish ponds. So by looking at those two definitions, you can extract two differences quite comfortably. You can say, for instance, that apiculture involves rearing of bees, while aquaculture involves rearing of fish. One complete difference, 1 mark. The other difference could be on the structure that is used to keep these livestock. In apiculture, bees are kept in beehives, while in aquaculture, fish are kept in fish ponds. Another difference. So the definitions should help you to identify corresponding parts so that you can scoop out your differences and list them so that you garner all the marks allocated to that question. Now, if you say that apiculture involves rearing of bees, unlike aquaculture, you have told us nothing, because you have not told us what aquaculture entails, which is the livestock that is being kept. So avoid incomplete answers or shortcuts. You'll be penalized for that, you'll not get marks. You are free to use table form, but be sure to have the corresponding parts linked together. Number one difference under one term should be related to the number one of the other term in your table. So you're free to use the table, but you're also free to use complete sentences. So on the screen are some areas where differences, questions on differences may be drawn. Now, there are some differences that have got a word that confines us to particular responses. For example, if a question reads as follows: state the functional difference between a ring spanner and an adjustable spanner. A ring spanner and an adjustable spanner. Functional. So you don't look at the shape and talk about the shape. That now becomes structural. So functional is operational. So one functional difference between a ring spanner and an adjustable spanner is that an adjustable spanner can be used to tighten or loosen bolts and nuts of various sizes, different sizes, while a ring spanner can be used to tighten or loosen bolts and nuts of specific sizes. The other functional difference could be in terms of efficacy or the grip. The ring spanner offers a firmer grip, while the adjustable spanner offers a less firm grip during work. That is functional. Questions that are involving factors. Describe the factors that affect agriculture. Describe the factors that one should consider when selecting a breeding stock for beef, cattle. You don't just state the factor and leave it there. You must qualify it. You must briefly explain it for you to go away with marks. For example, factors that may be used to cite structures is not just security, but good security. Or you say, cited in a secure area. When you say security, that answer is ambiguous. We don't know whether you are saying the security should be bad in the part where the structure is to be sited, or whether it should be good. So we must qualify that factor by saying good security. At the same time, the slope is considered, or topography, but you must tell us what kind of topography. It's a gentle slope, okay? Don't just say topography. Don't just say slope and leave it like that. Drainage is also considered in siting farm structures. So we must say good drainage, not drainage alone. Now, factors on selection for breeding include health, production, mothering ability, among others. But as I've said, you must qualify healthy, or the animal should have good health. The animal should be a high producer of milk if the intention is to keep dairy animals, or the animal should be productive. Don't just say level of production is considered. Now assume that you're addressing a layman who has never been into an agriculture class. They have asked you, what factors should I consider? Feeding. Of course, harvesting doesn't apply in paper 2, but of course, when preparing for paper 1, castrating or castration, shearing, because you can easily be asked to describe the procedure of those and other many practices that I've not named. There are questions on control measures. Control of parasites. Now, it is important for you to note that these control measures of parasites are categorized into cultural, physical, also referred to as mechanical, chemical, and biological. If you are asked to state 4 control measures of a named parasite, please pick one control measure from each and every category. If you go for 4 measures from one category, then you'd get only 1 mark out of 4 marks. I want to repeat that. Where you are asked to give control measures, especially in essay question or section B, please ask yourself whether the control measures are categorized or not, so that you pull out one control measure from each and every category for you to be able to garner 4 marks. If you write the categories as your answer to a question like state 4 control measures of livestock parasites, then you say cultural, physical, chemical, biological, 0 mark, because you'd have answered a different question, which probably says, name the categories of control measures of livestock parasites. So pay attention to the question so that you do not miss a mark. Those are groups of methods and do not qualify to be answers unless an appropriate example is given. So a cultural method of controlling livestock parasites is proper housing. So once you say cultural method, then qualify it by posting an example of a method that falls under that category. Now, where you are to give chemical control, there are a vast number of chemicals that may be used to control parasites. You are not bound to remember them. You are free to say, use appropriate insecticide. If, say, the parasite in question is an insect, use appropriate chemical. Where you are certain that the parasite is an insect, it is safer to talk of use appropriate insecticide, because the word chemical is broad. Therefore, you should not use the word chemical. Insecticide, where the parasite is an insect. Use antihelminthics, where the parasite is an endoparasite like liver fluke, tapeworm, among others. You may also be asked to give causal organism for a given disease. For example, name the causal organism for Nagana in cattle. Name the causal organism for Nagana in cattle. Well, we are aware Nagana, also known as trypanosomiasis, is transmitted by tsetse flies. Thank you, I've had a whisper. Transmitted by tsetse flies. So in answering that question, name the causal organism. Tsetse fly is not an answer, because tsetse fly is a vector. Vectors transmit diseases, they don't cause. Pathogens cause diseases. So that microorganism that is mechanically lifted by tsetse fly from an infected animal to a healthy animal is the causal organism. So let us know, thou shalt remember, that vectors transmit diseases while pathogens cause diseases. Don't give the vectors as coastal organisms. Another example is in the effect of ticks on livestock. There is good news when asked about a disease agent in agriculture, in livestock. You only need to know the category of the disease, whether it is bacterial, viral, or protozoa. So that if asked the causal agent, and you know that the disease is caused by a bacterium, just say bacteria or bacterium. You don't have to look for the exact name of the bacterium. For example, give the causal organism for anthrax. Anthrax, as we are aware, is a bacterial disease. So you only need to know that it's bacterial so that you can post the word bacteria as an answer to that question. Otherwise, if you know the scientific name, Bacillus anthracis, you can still put it, but remember to comply with the rules of binomial nomenclature, where the genus name must begin with capital letter, and of course the species name written in small letters. Then remember to underline the two words separately. Now, having said that, it is also common to find questions on symptoms. When you are asked the symptoms of a given disease, avoid general symptoms. In other words, symptoms that apply to many other diseases. Symptoms like dullness, loss of appetite will be seen when an animal is suffering from one disease and another one suffering from another one. We'll still see dullness. Rather, in answering this question, go to specific symptoms, symptoms that are unique, symptoms that once you observe in your animal, you are certain of the disease the animal is suffering from. Now, state two symptoms of brucellosis. Number one, premature birth. That one is a symptom of brucellosis. We don't see it in many other diseases. Infertility in cows, low libido in bulls, and retained placenta. Those are very specific symptoms that we don't see in animals suffering from other diseases. Questions involving calculation. Of course, on the screen, I've indicated questions that may be found in paper 1. However, the questions that may be found in paper 2 may be derived from feed rations. Compute a pig ration of 18% DCP. In fact, I want to give this as an example. Compute a pig ration of 18% digestible crude protein using maize grain, 7% DCP, using maize grain, 7% DCP, and sunflower seed cake, 34% DCP. Use Pearson's square method. Use Pearson's square method. I want to point out that a question is a piece of instruction. Where you see use Pearson's square method, the square must appear for marking of that response to be done. If the square doesn't appear, then that response will not be marked. It will simply be cancelled and 0 awarded. When answering that question, your square must be intact. It must not be broken. The lines must not bypass each other the way we see in axis of graphs. That is not a square. An appropriate square, therefore, must be intact and must have the diagonal lines, and at the center, the desired digestible crude protein, the 18% that I've mentioned. Then when you begin to do your working, you use the Pearson square to determine the respective ratios of the feed materials available. That is sunflower seed cake and maize grain. So the Pearson square method, that square is simply to help you determine the ratio of mixing the two feed materials available. Once you are done with that, now you come down to the working. Now the working, when you are calculating the amount of, let's say, sunflower seed cake, make sure you point out to the examiner, quantity of sunflower seed cake is given by, because if you fail to signal the examiner, they may not know what you are working out. So you can point out at the beginning of your working calculation, or you point out in your answer. Let's say that you have arrived at 60 kilograms of maize grain. So you say 60 kilograms of maize grain. At least the examiner will know that whatever you have worked out is for maize grain. And 40 kilograms of sunflower seed cake. 40 kilograms of sunflower seed cake. That is assuming that you wanted to prepare a ration of 100 kilograms. So, in marking such a question, the examiner will religiously confine themselves to the question instruction, presence of the Pearson square, and then the answer, if the unit is indicated, and then the working, how you have arrived at the quantity of the two feed materials that are being used. So make sure that your work is clearly shown, step by step. Don't take a shortcut or don't work out elsewhere. Then post the answers. You'll miss the mark for method. So just like in mathematics, method is awarded, and also the answer if the units are clearly shown. Let us look at some do's and don'ts while writing agriculture paper. And also when preparing for the paper. Many candidates run short of time and become unable to complete the paper. It is therefore important for you to take time during this time of revision, ample time with your agriculture revision. Don't assume, don't say that agriculture is an easy subject. Well, it might be easy, but remember, it is a technical subject which requires a lot of interpretation. So take sufficient time by looking at past examination papers. Then on the examination day, right in the examination room, make sure you allocate sufficient time to each and every section such that you do not run short of time. You can focus on easy questions, and I say easy in quotes. Easy, in other words, questions whose answers are readily available in your mind. You can focus on them first, and then you come back to questions that are appearing a bit technical. It is important to read through the whole paper. That will not only give you confidence, but it will give you a mental picture of the paper. It will stimulate your mind too, to bring into memory all the concepts that are tested, all the concepts that you have been taught. So read through the whole paper before you begin writing the answers. At that time, you have written your name, date, sign, index number and the rest. Read through the whole paper before you get back to begin writing your answers. Continue. 1 minute. Just give us a minute. We are relocating shortly. Samsung, default speakers change to Samsung. It's disappeared. No, the slide has not disappeared. They simply say default speakers change to Samsung. That's okay. Yeah? Okay. HDMI. Is it okay? Once again, thank you, technical team. May God bless you for standing with us. So, another area where candidates lose marks is on grammatical mistakes. Now, where a candidate makes a grammatical mistake that changes the meaning of the intended answer, then the candidate misses the marks. Now, language of the exam is English, so practice talking English, explain yourself in English during this time of revision. Now, some examples of grammatical mistakes. Let's say you've been asked to state 2 factors a farmer may consider when selecting a breeding stock. Once again, one of the responses has got to do with the growth rate. The question is on beef cattle, as you can see. So growth rate is key in selecting a breeding stock for beef cattle. But how do we frame that answer? How do we put it? Do we say fast in growth? Do we say early maturity? Or do we say fast in maturity? Of course, we meet answers like fast in maturity. But I would like to point out that maturity is a stage. Once attained, the organism, the animal does not grow anymore. So we can't say fast in maturity. That is a grammatical mistake. Spelling mistakes are also common, but they are only penalized if the wrongly spelled word has another meaning altogether. Spelling mistakes are common on technical terms, and also where candidates are required to identify. Let's give examples. Maybe you want to describe the act of giving birth by pigs. Do we say farrowing, the first one, or we say farrowing, the second one, or we say following? Obviously, it is the first one. If you say farrowing, this second one, then this changes the meaning. From the word farrow, a channel made during digging or primary tillage. Following, of course, we rarely talk of following, but from the word fallow, fallow period. So where the spelling mistake gives rise to a word that has got another meaning, then the candidate loses the marks. So it is important to familiarize yourself with the correct spelling of various technical terms and also where identity is required. Perhaps one more example. You might be given a question like this. Name the structure that is used to restrain livestock during an operation. Which structure is that? Obviously a crush, isn't it? And if you write crush with C.R.E., that is okay. But if you wrongly spell it and say C.L.U.T.C.H., that is a clutch, which is a component in the tractor. Correct. So that would attract a penalty because the wrong spelling has given rise to a word with another meaning. Let us now talk about answers requiring identity. Perhaps you are given an illustration of an egg. Then you are asked to name a part labeled B, which happens to be the yolk. Which one is it? Is it the first, the second, or the third? This component of an egg, that part of an egg. Okay, I can see you are interrogating your minds. It is the second one. The first one, YOKE, is an implement used to harness oxen during plowing. The second one is the egg component. Again, the litter, the bedding that is put on floor of poultry in deep litter system. Is it litter with double T-E-R or litter with T-R-E? Double T-E-R. So I hope that makes us be sensitive enough to spelling mistakes. Now, do ruminants chew cud with C-U-D or curd with C-U-R-D? The first one, C-U-D. Very good. So that means that as you do your revision, you need to focus on technical terms, paying attention to the spellings. Now, how do we present our answers? This is another area where students lose marks, even where, on answers around concepts that they know very well. State 2 management practices done to an EU few weeks before tapping. Tapping is the act of mating in sheep. So what are these management practices done before tapping? Is steaming up one of them? No. Is flashing one of them? Yes. So if a candidate, let's say this question has 2 marks allocated to it. If a candidate says steaming up stroke flashing, how many marks does this candidate deserve? Yes, I can hear some people saying 0, others saying 1, because flashing is correct and steaming up is not correct. But I want you to note that there is no mark here, because this stroke means that the words on either side of the slash have the same meaning. But the truth is that flashing is not steaming up, isn't it? Yes. Steaming up is done few weeks or few days before giving birth, before lambing, isn't it? But flashing is done before mating, before tapping. Very good. For which reason, the response labeled A earns the candidate 0 on the reason that the 2 statements have different meaning. Crashing and flashing. What do you think about the second response? How many marks? 1. Somebody saying 1. Okay. What about the third one? Crashing or flashing? 0. Very good. So here, the word "and" separates those 2 points as much as they are written on the same line. Therefore, this candidate still will be given 2 marks. Okay? Where the candidate uses "or," no mark. Because this is a candidate that is not sure. Remember, an exam is supposed to establish what you have known and what you have not known. So the word "or" tends to signal a state of uncertainty in you as a candidate. Avoid using it. Avoid using the slash also. Crashing, stroke, flashing, not stroke, but comma, flashing, is also uncertain. The best way to put your answer is by writing those 2 practices in 2 separate lines. An examiner will not mistake, will understand that you have listed the practices separately. There are 2 separate practices. So this comma may go unnoticed. And if it is unnoticed, then it means crashing, flashing. You are also talking about a practice called crashing, flashing. So the best way is to put the responses in 2 lines. And where you are asked for 2 responses, usually 2 lines will be provided. Now, again, here is an example of a response that may earn 0. To a question, for example, state one method of controlling ectoparasites. So you say spraying, stroke, dipping the calf. The 2 are methods, but are they the same? Only the purpose is the same. Therefore, this earns the candidate 0. So let us know how to present our answers in a manner that makes it clear for the examiner what you really intend him to get. So the stroke means the 2 answers are the same, hence they're alternatives. If both are correct, only the first is awarded. If one is wrong, both answers become wrong. So avoid stroking answers unless you're sure both alternatives mean the same thing. For example, overflow pipe, spillway have the same meaning in the fish pond. Now, the word or, as I've said earlier, means either. So you risk losing marks because you have left the examiner to choose for you. And this is penalized. It is not allowed that you put your answer in a manner that the examiner puts for you. Or indicates that the learner is not sure, and I think I've said that. Avoid incomplete answers. Now, remember, a question is a sentence that Is it okay? So where you are required to identify a tool which occurs in more than one form, please remember to be specific. Milk churn is the correct name of the equipment that is used for holding milk during transportation. Okay, holding milk during transportation. Don't say it is milking churn. We don't have milking churn, but we have milking can for holding milk during milking. Are we together? Good. Oh, sorry, we are through with that. Now, where a question requires you to state the function or use of a tool or an implement, again, be specific. Now, an illustrator, for example, is used during castration. Do not say it is used for castration, because there is yet another device that is also used during castration. So when you say it is used for castration, then the answer is ambiguous. One may not know, are you referring to the illustrator or the rubbering? So the exact role of the illustrator is stretching the rubbering during castration. So be specific on the exact role of a given implement or tool or equipment. Trocar is used to pierce the rumen. Don't say it is used to relieve the animal of bloat. The exact role that it plays during that operation is to pierce the rumen. On uses of a panga, cutting vegetation during clearing. We had said earlier, you don't say a panga is used for clearing alone. That does not accurately bring out the use of a panga. Digging, planting holes is okay, but you don't say planting alone. Digging, that a panga is used for planting. That one is not right. A panga is used for harvesting sugarcane. Don't say it is used for harvesting, because we don't use a panga for harvesting other crops. Use it to harvest sugarcane. Now, a pliers is used for cutting thin wires. And the word thin is key, because some wires might be too thick to be held with a pliers, or thin metal strips. So that makes your response to be accurate. Now, on maintenance practices, once again, I'd earlier said that where the question is specific, the part to be maintained must be named. Where the question is general, then you simply say repair broken parts. But again, I want to say the following. You are asked to give maintenance measures on an implement like a disc plow. Don't say wash, because wash would be directly introducing moisture to the metallic parts, which would then rust. Say clean. Now, you want to stow your ox plow for long. Perhaps you are through with operations that require the use of an ox plow. So you want to say that stow the implement under shade. I want to ask, do we store them under shade, S-H-A-D-E, or under shed, S-H-E-D? Shed, very good. So we store the implements under shed, S-H-E-D, because that is a structure with a roof that is leak-proof, and therefore will protect the metallic parts of the implement from rusting. Now, there are two other ways of preventing rusting, and one of them involves painting. So if you want to talk about painting as a method of preventing rusting, don't just say painting. You must specify the type of paint, because we have got water paints and oil paints. Certainly we use oil paints because they do not permit moisture to access the surface of the metallic parts. So you must specify oil paints. Apart from that, you must also state that the oil paints are applied on metallic parts, because some implements have got parts that are made of rubber. So don't just say apply oil paints. Say apply oil paints on metallic parts to prevent rusting. I think that is sufficient. Or that we had already gone through that particular slide in an earlier slide. Let us look at some few ways of maximizing our scores in essays. There are some points that are often forgotten by candidates, or the candidates present them in brief that does not earn them maximum marks. Now, watering in livestock management is a practice. However, I want you to notice that it should not be put as watering. It is provision of plenty of clean water. Watering technically means applying water to planted crops. So let's use correct language and say provide plenty of clean water. So you might get 2 points there, because one involves the practice giving of water. Then not any water should be given, but must be clean and plenty. Now, feeding is a marking point. However, as a candidate, you can qualify it and get more marks by saying adequate and balanced. Feeding in a livestock, feeding of poultry. But you also get more marks by giving a specific example of a feed material that is used to feed the livestock in question. For example, layers mash, if the question is on layers. Now, proper housing is also often forgotten because it appears obvious. However, take note that apart from mentioning proper housing as a marking point, you can get more marks by qualifying it. Mention 1 or 2 features of a properly constructed livestock housing. For example, leak-proof roof, well ventilated, well lit, warm and dry floor. Just mention any 2 features of a proper housing. Now, treatment of sick animals, always forgotten. This is a marking point in livestock management, a question requiring you to describe management of livestock. But you get more marks by giving the reason why the animal is treated, and also by saying that treatment should be done promptly. So prompt treatment of sick animals to avoid spread of the disease to healthy animals. 2 marking points. You've given the reason, you've given the practice. Isolation of sick animals, a marking point. But again, giving the reason will earn you additional marks. Keeping of proper records, often forgotten. So you mentioned that proper records are kept, but you get more marks by giving a specific type of record that is relevant to the animal in question. So while writing your essays, please remember those points. As we come to the close, on the screen are some few effective revision methods that you may employ at this time. Revision by objectives. In our agriculture syllabus, there are objectives for teaching or used while teaching every topic. I hope that you have been given syllabi. If not, you may liaise with the teachers to get them. Now, those objectives can be transformed into questions. The questions shared among candidates, and then the candidates research and come and make presentations to the others. An effective way of revising. No question in K.C.S.E exam will be set outside of those objectives. Revision by topics is common. Need not to talk so much about it. Revision by photographs. And here, when you feel tired as a candidate, you can play with a textbook like a standard 3 kid. Flip through the pages, and where you come across a diagram, try to internalize, familiarize yourself with the diagram or a photograph by asking the following questions. What does this diagram represent? Okay, in other words, the identity. What is its function? What are the names of the parts? Are there maintenance measures carried out on the diagram, if it is on the structure represented by the diagram? You know? So you are behaving like a small boy in primary school. Meanwhile, you are familiarizing yourself. Again, no diagram will appear in K.C.S.E that you have not seen. You have seen it. That's why I advocate for revision by diagrams. Video clips may also be used where they are available to go through the management practices carried out in livestock production. Revision by operations. So you list all the operations carried out in livestock production, and then you share these operations, and then each candidate does some research on the subheadings, name of the animals that on which that operation is carried out, the stage of growth at which the operation is done on the animal, the method or the equipment that are used to carry out the operation, the procedure, of course, the equipment, precautions, if any, and reasons why that operation is done. If you do that, you would have revised the paper 2 almost sufficiently. Then presentations, I've talked about this. Narrations become useful, especially when you're out of class. You have done some revision. Now you can narrate to your friend as you walk around the field what you have studied, so that the friend can confirm to you whether you have got it right. You will be assisting him, he will also be assisting you. Use of flow diagrams, where applicable, may also help, and acronyms. Very important. Please go through the 2010 to 2019 K.C.S.E exams and mocks. That will acquaint you with the latest trends in K.C.S.E examination. The following are some routine management practices, which of course you can focus on. My list may not be exhaustive, but it is important to list them and look at them to prepare for paper 2. Some practices are carried out in virtually all livestock. It's important to know that, regardless of the class, the age, and the physiological status. While some practices are specific, a practice like docking is carried out on sheep, and in this case, the female sheep. So it does not apply, so it is specific to sheep. It is advisable for you to start with the general practices during your revision, practices that can be carried out on more than one livestock. Then later you can zero in on specific practices. In that way, you do not forget, and you will not likely to make a mistake. So again, some general practices include, as I said earlier, provision of plenty of clean, fresh water. This word ad lib is the short form for ad libitum, meaning plenty. The animal should drink that clean water and still have some water to spare. Okay. Did I move so fast? Okay. I've noticed something that is, yeah, that slide could be ahead of mine, or this one is okay. Fine. So on the screen are some general livestock management practices: identification, proper housing, control of endoparasites, ectoparasites, and so on. Then now we have specific practices. Rattling. In ship, we carry out these practices: docking, shearing, crashing, ringing, and of course, tapping. In cattle, we have branding or identification. Dehorning is also done in cattle. In pigs, there is tooth clipping. There is weighing, of course, to determine the growth rate. In poultry, we have debeaking. Yes? No, that's a mistake. It is debeaking, okay? Yes. Thank you. So now, flushing, steaming up, and creep feeding are management practices around feeding, isn't it? And they are different practices depending on the time and physiological condition of the livestock on which this practice is carried out. Flushing, for example, is done before mating in sheep. Steaming up is done before birth in a number of livestock. Creep feeding is done before weaning. So those are feeding practices. And during our revision, we need to ask ourselves which animals is flushing carried out on, at what stage, and for what reason is flushing done, among others. Castration is only done to male animals. Therefore, when describing castration, don't say the cow is restrained, because a cow is adult female cattle, okay? So don't use a technical term that is irrelevant. Hoof trimming is done to hooved animals only. Of course, there are also ruminants. When you choose to do topical revision, now you are on farm machinery. What you should focus on, and again I say that these subheadings can be shared and research done and presentations made. Sources of farm power. Maybe one of the students take on that. Tractor as a source of power. In other words, how is power generated within the tractor engine? So here you talk about the strokes, the 4-stroke engine and the 2-stroke engine. The engine parts and their functions. Somebody else can take that. Types of engine and the differences in the types of engines. Diesel engine, petrol engine, okay? The working mechanism of the engines, the differences between 4-stroke and 2-stroke cycle, the hitching methods. Now, this means the manner in which the implements are attached onto the tractor. We have got some implements that are attached at one point, the drawbar. We need to know them. For example, the trailer. Some implements, on the other hand, are attached, yes, using the tractor lift arms, okay? Yes. So we need to know them, those implements and how they are attached. The transmission method, the power transmission method, the tractor systems, which include the cooling system, the electrical system, the fuel system, among others. And finally, all the implements that are used in crop farming. We need to know them by name, their uses, the names of their parts, and also maintenance measures. With that, dear candidates, I want to say, work hard now. You will work less in future, yet live comfortably. Perhaps at this point, if there is a question, we can ask, and then we find a solution to it.
Okay, for the question and answer session, we are going to start from the host school, where we're going to get 3 questions, then we come to the rest of the schools. As we get the questions, let the schools prepare their questions.
Thank you. That's clear.
There are 3 questions from the other school. 3 questions. All you're not ready. Can we just go to the other schools and then come back to you as you want to start? You can start. You can come over here. And just stand over there and ask your question.
So I say thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Abed Mutua from Mujibim. So my question was about the third question, section B. When I'm given the diagram, then I don't get the first answer part A, which may be stating that I give the function, I give the name of the part, but you find that I don't know the name, but I know the function of the name. Will I get the answer right, part B and C, or I'll get wrong? Thank you.
That's a good question. Thank you. Tied questions, as the name suggests, if you commit and write a wrong answer to the first part, then you miss marks for that first part and the second part as well. If you do not know the answer to the first part, as I said earlier, give yourself time during that exam time. Just leave it blank, but provide an answer to the second part that you're certain with. Don't commit, don't rush and commit an answer you're not certain about, because if it is wrong, you lose all the marks for those first 2 parts of the tied question. Thank you.
Okay, let us have another question. Who else has another question? You can just come closer.
Yes. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Zioka Dennis. My question is, can you explain for me the differences between isolation and quarantine? Didn't get the question.
Yeah. Yes, Nzioka is asking the difference between isolation and quarantine. Now, isolation is separating an animal within a farm from the rest of the animals in the same farm, with the aim of preventing spread of the disease from one animal to another within the same farm. Quarantine, on the other hand, is imposed in a wide area to prevent spread of the disease from one area to another, or from one region to another. And quarantine is often imposed by the government of Kenya so as to avoid spread. Remember, it is restriction of movement of livestock from a given area for a period of time in order to prevent spread of outbreak of a notifiable disease. Spread of a notifiable disease from one part to another. Thank you.
Okay, we are going to have a question from Katelembo, Center of Excellence. Katelembo, kindly unmute your microphone and ask your question. Katelembo, Center of Excellence, kindly ask your question. Katelembo, kindly ask your question. Okay, we are going to have a question from Kamodhanga. Kamodhanga, kindly unmute your microphone and ask your question. Kamodhanga, kindly unmute your microphone and ask your question. Kamodhanga, kindly unmute your... Yes,
are you getting me? I'm not from Kamodhanga, and I have 2 questions. I have 2 questions.
Yes, go on. Kamudanga.
Scientific answer, or one can just write a continuous answer.
Kindly, Kamudanga, repeat your question. Repeat your question.
Okay, I'm asking, is it a must that if one is asked a question concerning plants, animal, pest, or weeds, to answer in scientific names? The second one is, in the essay question, can one state and explain the answer, or one can just write a continuous answer? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Kamudanga. If you're asked to identify, let's say, a weed or a causal organism, you don't have to commit and write two names. Now, weeds have got common names, and weeds also have got botanical names. Once you have written the common name, that is sufficient. And a word of caution in regard to naming of weeds, please do not write in mother tongue. The second question, I think, is in regard to the essays. You are free, firstly, to write essays in continuous prose, but you're also free to write your essays in point form. Now, when you choose to state and explain, that is an indication of an organized candidate. For as long as you have not repeated a point, you are expounding. In fact, the stimulus word describe and explain require detail. Therefore, you are free to state and explain if you are asked to describe.